So did Hillary trump the Donald or the Donald trump Hillary? Not many will argue that Hillary Clinton edged out her Republican presidential nominee candidate Donald Trump this morning's first presidential debate. But did Donald Trump actually lose any votes in his constituency, and did Hillary Clinton do anything to win the hearts of American voters? This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight I'm joined on Skype from London by Professor Kevin Morrell from Warwick Business School. He researches political speeches and public speaking to talk tactics used in the first US presidential debate. Kevin's also written on Donald Trump's style and why Donald Trump is more effective orator than you think. Kevin, it's good to have you on the Moneymakers this evening. Your assessment of the performances of the respective candidates, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. They're the only two we really care about.
Well, I think Donald Trump perhaps got found out in this format. So whereas his natural campaigning tactic has been the soundbite or the 140-character tweet, he had to speak for up to 2 minutes on some quite detailed policy areas. And to answer your question, I think the clear winner was Hillary Clinton, but then I'm not a natural Trump voter.
But that's the danger of this, because one can sit in with your particular political perspective or with a New York or a London or a Joburg lens on your eyes and say, what kind of people would vote for Donald Trump? Yet the candidates are pretty much neck and neck in almost every poll you look at.
Yes, I mean, as an outsider, someone looking in on American politics, it is pretty strange. But then in the UK, we've just gone through a European referendum, and the Brexit issue left many of us equally puzzled. So I guess commentators are a little bit uncertain at the moment, particularly if you look at how close the polls have been and the errors in polling in recent months.
Now, in the long-form presidential debate format, Donald Trump was found to be wanting. Up until now, and this is something you've studied in great detail as to why Donald Trump is more effective than you might think. Explain to me what makes Donald Trump an effective communicator. It's all about the size and the syntax of the sentences.
Well, I mean, I think one mistake that's been made by a lot of commentators is to think that because he uses simple language, that he's not actually a sophisticated orator. It's very difficult to communicate a message so simply that, millions of people understand what you're saying. So I think that's one of the skills he's had. In terms of what makes him effective, it's often dismissed his experience on The Apprentice. But actually, he's spent 14 seasons of that crafting sound bites, knowing how to look to camera, knowing how to appeal to people, and polishing phrases and slogans. And his skill in that area is kind of unparalleled. And also, it's not one that the American public has seen before in a presidential campaign.
Yet Hillary Clinton is often awkward, she's often shy, she doesn't have a great camera presence. I don't know what she's like in person, but in 21st century elections, as in late 20th century elections, the camera is really what makes voters' minds up ultimately.
Well, I mean, repeated pleas almost by President Obama to say that the presidential campaign is not a reality TV show are to try and guard against that very fear, I think. In terms of how Hillary Clinton comes across, she comes across as a very polished speaker, someone with a great command of detail, forensic and so on. But it's fair to say that she's not a particularly popular candidate either. A lot of Democrats aren't particularly happy with her as a choice. So perhaps Donald Trump, perhaps the timing of his entry into politics, his late entry into politics, is something that's doing him favours, and he perhaps hasn't come up against the most powerful opponent that he could have done.
No, absolutely not. I was having a conversation with somebody who works in the US consulate in South Africa this morning and getting some feedback on their analysis on this particular debate. And I asked the question, why don't real people stand to become American president? And this person's response was, well, who wants to go through the process of the primaries? Who wants to go through the selection process, this massively public breaking down of characters and personalities that lasts for what it feels like a 10-year process, but it's probably just a couple of months. But no really strong candidates have come forward in this particular presidential election, have they?
Well, I mean, one thing, if you look at American politics, you've had either a Bush or a Clinton since 1980, apart from in the last 4 years, as either president or secretary of state. So there is something dynastic about that route to power. So the idea that anybody can become president is perhaps a romantic, given recent history. But I mean, I think that being such an insider gives Clinton advantages in raising money. It gives her advantages in terms of, she's clearly very experienced. But I think Donald Trump had one of the better lines from the debate, which was to say that she's had experience, but she's had bad experience.
And again, keeping it nice and simple, but Donald Trump was found flat-footed several times in that particular debate. I mean, Hillary Clinton was challenging him on his tax returns. He challenged her to release emails during her time as Secretary of State. And then she managed to lure Donald Trump into admitting that he didn't pay federal taxes. Now, this is a blunder of epic proportions, unless, of course, the voter base that supports Donald Trump likes it because, as in his words, he's smart when it comes to running his businesses.
Yes, I mean, ordinarily one would say that it's the kind of mistake from which no one could recover, but he does those with such regularity that it sort of blurs into one, I think. I suppose one argument might be that he's appealing to a fantasy amongst the working class that they will eventually reach the stage where they can earn so much money that they don't pay tax because they are that successful. But it's a very risky strategy for him to talk about this as a successful and winning contribution, if you like, because as Clinton later said, one of the reasons that the federal government is in debt is because people don't pay their fair share of taxes.
She's a smart debater. She thinks on her feet. She's a far better operator in the debate context than Trump can ever hope to be. We're going to have another couple of these public debates. Do they really make that much of a difference in the mind of the great unwashed American voting public?
Well, that's an interesting phrase. I think what I would say is a kind of bizarre thing about this election is it's hard to imagine who would be a swing voter. Who is going to be on the cusp of either voting for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? They're poles apart. I guess where they're important is in mobilizing the base, because for both parties, the turnout of voters is going to be a key thing. One thing that we would expect about the Democrats, particularly with what they learned through electing and re-electing Obama, is that they will have a very strong ground operation. So in that sense, winning the debate might be something that motivates the base to turn out. Also, it is very close. As you said in the introduction, the polls are not that far apart. So I think whilst there isn't going to be the knockout blow like we maybe saw in the early days of TV debates, I think they are still important. And I think what's important for Trump is he's being, I would say, found out by the formats because he can't do the soundbite and he can't do the 140-character tweet. He's having to talk about detail, about policy, and it's not his expertise.
I mean, it was JFK who really won an election against Richard Nixon way back in the early 1960s, and Nixon's first attempt to get into the White House. Nixon blundered on television, and it was JFK's election to lose. Am I getting my history right there?
That's right. I mean, I think a couple of other details about that. I think Nixon actually had flu. So when he went under the lights, he was sweaty, so that didn't help with his TV appearance. But I mean, I think they did a study where if you looked at the content of what was actually said rather than their appearance, Nixon sort of came ahead. So it's certainly the case that being on camera, as you mentioned earlier, is really important. So I think the split screen view of Trump looking perhaps a little out of his depth, a little flustered, and Hillary Clinton looking very confident and assured, I think that's quite an important feature to how the event will have come across.
It's interesting that you use the terms confident and assured. Some people would look at the look of Hillary Clinton's face in that split screen and say she's smug, which is the appeal then of Donald Trump, who's being bullied by, and let's face it, this is a woman who could run the country. They allowed a black man to run the country. Are they really ready for a woman to run the country? The Donald Trump supporters, this is?
Well, I think you're right about there is a risk that Clinton looked happy at some points, or even, as you said, smug. I mean, one thing I would say about gender is that I think that some of the what I'd call microaggression that Trump showed towards Clinton will actually damage him with women voters. So I think it will be interesting to see how the role of gender plays out in turnout and who votes for whom.
Obama sold hope. Clinton is selling, I don't know, the status quo. We've got Trump, who seems to be selling an anti-establishment agenda, but doesn't seem to be doing it that effectively. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
I'd say he's been extraordinarily effective, and that's why I would say I find him quite terrifying, really. He has run on an anti-establishment ticket, if you like. I mean, one of the things about political elections, just the most basic rhetorical device used in political elections is one of contrast. So it's always harder for the incumbent, it's always harder for the government in power to run an election based on contrast, because they can't disavow what's happened over the last 4 or 8 years. So I think that is a basic challenge for anyone running, to get re-elected in a sense. Although of course it would be Hillary Clinton's first term.
Now, it's an extraordinary time. I mean, are you going to be watching every single nuance and every single debate live as it comes through in the next couple of months, Kevin?
I won't be watching live because I've got 3 kids, so getting up at 2:30 in the morning is a bit of a stretch. But yes, I mean, I do find American politics very interesting, and at the moment, it's unfortunately gripping because of the fearful prospect of somebody like Donald Trump being elected. So yes, it's certainly something we'll be following closely.
Kevin Morrell, thank you so much for joining us this evening on the MoneyMakers, researcher of political speeches and public speaking. Still 2 more presidential debates to go before November the 4th. Which will be the most decisive? We'll have to wait and see. But Kevin Morrell will be playing back those speeches once the kids are at school and giving his analysis of those as well. From the MoneyMakers for this evening, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.